What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Invincible. And no, the title is not a spoiler. That's literally what the volume is called. Invincible Volume 18, The Death of Everyone. It just happens to be a really clickbait volume. So here's the thing about this. What we initially do here, and there's a little bit we're kind of skipping over just because of the fact that we got a lot to unpack over the course of this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up basically with the Coalition of Planets prison, which of course is orbiting Telestria. And that's where Omni-Man Nolan is currently being held, right? Keep in mind that Nolan basically stood to Alan the alien and tried to stop him from basically showing up to Earth with the Scourge virus and then obliterating the whole thing. Now, of course, because of the actions of both Nolan and Mark, Alan the alien basically sending the entirety of the Scourge virus around the Earth was basically halted, right? That was essentially stopped. But because of this and because of everything going on, the fact that basically Nolan and Mark were right, that ultimately Nolan's being let go, right? All the charges against him are being dropped and he's basically being freed here. Now, a lot of this seems to come from Alan because Alan kind of looks around and it's like, I was set on all sides as being the coalition leader. I was caught up in my role. I felt like I had to do something, that sort of thing. So really taking a brunt of this on himself and ultimately letting Alan go. The other thing about this is, remember, Mark lost his powers, but that does not stop Adam E from wanting some of that nightly loving. You know what I mean? Like, that's a power he hasn't lost. Mark is not in need of Viagra. And so where he's a little hesitant about it, right? Because they're, when it came to their personal life, this kind of intimacy element, it seemed like his power sort of added something a little extra to it. And without that, he basically seems to be lacking. And so as a result of this, Eve's like, no, we're good. But in the middle of them basically, doing the damn thing and getting it on, suddenly Mark, he starts freaking out, right? And the reason why is because he's levitating. So there you have it, guys. If you want to have powers, go have sex. So here's the thing about this. In all reality, once Mark's powers essentially snap back and he's back to really being in his role as Invincible, one of the first things he does is he goes and he sees Dinosaurus, right? Now, the big thing about this is that Dinosaurus didn't know if Mark was ever going to get his powers back, right? If Mark's ability to go back to being invincible was ever going to return. And the funny thing about this is that Dinosaurus, kind of looking at the superhero landscape and looking at the roles the superhero play, really saw Mark as a cut above the rest. And the reason why is because Mark was one of the only people who consistently challenged Cecil, right? That when you had the new iteration of the Guardians of the Globe who took over the version that were basically killed by Nolan back before he left Earth and all that kind of good stuff, that they don't really question Cecil. More so than that, they're part and parcel to humanity. And that while Mark does see himself as being part of humanity, Mark was also the one that to a degree seemed to show some leniency to Dinosaurus in the sense that he rescued him and then also said, like, your idea of trying to find ways to improve humanity is a good thing. But the truth is that what you're trying to do here is causing problems that ultimately, without Mark being there, Dinosaurus didn't really see a way for humanity to basically fix itself, specifically with regards to the environment, right? The humanity was just going to keep on making things worse until it got to a point where humanity realized how bad they'd screwed things up. And then by that point, it would just be too late. Now, some people would look at that and say, okay, but like humanity made its own bed, humanity should lay in it, humanity should basically be pushed to the brink of extinction. If it doesn't die out, then hopefully those who survive will make better choices. And if it does die out, then it was basically the entire human race putting a gun to its head and pulling the trigger, right? Like humanity did it to itself. And so the result of this is that with Mark gone, he was like, okay, something needs to be done here. And so what he did is he kind of set events in motion to create a global crisis, right? To create like this giant global calamity. And he tells Mark that is happening in Los Angeles. Now, he doesn't tell Mark it's a global thing. He says like, the city where I've done this is going to be in LA, right? It's Los Angeles where I've done this. Millions need to die in order for future billions to live, right? And so the next thing you get is you get Angstrom Levy. Like literally, he's just like, I must have my revenge. I've waited long enough. Of course, we know that like with his escapades, when he created all those different Invincibles, or at least brought them in from other realities to destroy Mark and initiated the Invincible War, that ultimately he was defeated and he was taken by the Technicians, these kind of enigmatic guys that worked, or at least that he worked for. And then ultimately he was just kind of cast aside. They're like, we don't need you anymore. They kicked him out of this dimension and that was basically it. And so essentially he's kind of coming back to Earth. Angstrom Levy's just the plot device just won't go away. the villain who won't go away. But Mark tries to radio Cecil. He finally gets a hold of him, tells him what's going on, arrives in Los Angeles, finds one of the bombs, and then tells him, get Robot here or whoever, so we can basically go through and disarm all these. Now, the funny thing here is that on the surface, it looks like what Robert Kirkman is doing is the same thing he did before. And to a degree, Kirkman does kind of have a history of recycling plots when it comes to Invincible, but not in the traditional sense. It's not as though he's the guy who doesn't have ideas, right? Kirkman is a genius writer. It's one of these things where the the idea serves the purpose of going to a greater whole, or it's a ruse. And that's what's happening here. It's a ruse. That robot realizes very, very quickly, this is not a bomb. This is not designed to basically detonate and to disrupt, the entirety of Los Angeles. Instead, this is basically a device that's designed to influence and activate other devices, right? Most likely to screw up the tectonic plates of Los Angeles. And so as they go through there, before anybody really has an understanding of what's going on, suddenly all these tectonic plates start disrupting, and basically Los Angeles experiences an earthquake. Right now, this is not new to the city of Los Angeles, right? California has experienced a lot of earthquakes over the years. What's significant about this is that Dinosaurus arrives on the scene in LA and then is ultimately met by Mark. And as the two of them are going at it, right, Dinosaurus kind of rehashes this sort of, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, right? So the utilitarian argument that we side with, right, that we agree with here on the channel, where it's just like, yeah, a few million people need to die now for countless billions to survive in the future, right? It's logical. Anything short of that and you're just being irrational. And so it's one of those interesting things, because in the midst of all that, basically Dinosaurus reveals that if Mark was really as smart as he makes himself out to be, he would realize this is all a distraction, that none of this is designed to be the main thing, right? That there's something much bigger going on. And when Mark's like, what? Like a distraction from what? Then basically like Dinosaurus looks off into the distance. And when Mark looks off in the same direction, he's like, what are you looking at? And basically what Dinosaurus had done is basically destabilize what looks like the entire country of Greenland, or at least a huge chunk of it, and in turn is initiating what is in effect a global catastrophe involving the tidal waves. He's basically sinking the coastal cities. And the argument behind this is that most people settle along coastal cities, right? I think it's something like 80% of the world's population lives along the coast. I'm not gonna, take that number as an absolute truth, right? I don't swear by it. I heard that number somewhere. But regardless, most people settle along coastal cities. By having so many people there, the idea of Dinosaurus is to essentially destabilize the way in which people live. And by focusing on the fact that coastal cities are now underwater, that's the future of climate change. He's basically fast tracking the effects of climate change, or at least simulating the effects of climate change, to essentially jog people, right? To say, fine, if you're not going to change of your own volition, if you're going to drag your feet, then I'm going to do what I have to do, right? And that's just sink or cover these coastal cities in water so you can see what your future will look like, not in 100 years, right? When it's just some distant thing in the future that you don't really have to worry about, but when it's happening in the here and now. Just millions and millions of people are being killed by Dinosaurus. And that's what kind of just flabbergasts and blows the mind of Mark, because as you would expect, a giant fight breaks out between the two of them. Now again, it's one of those things where Mark takes a stance of like, Dinosaurus is a mass murderer. Dinosaurus takes a stance of like, I get where your anger is coming from, right? Like I did something outside of your control. Basically, there's nothing Mark could do to stop Dinosaurus. And it's something that makes Mark feel weak, right? It makes him feel like he can't do anything. That's the perspective Dinosaurus has. But understand, what Dinosaurus is doing is the right thing here, right? That as human beings, we kind of have this tendency to look at a problem and say, well, if the problem's not here and now, if we don't have to face it here in this moment, well, then the problem doesn't exist, and so we won't worry about it until we actually have to face it. And if we're talking about something like a homework assignment, right? Or if we're talking about something like an assignment on the job, right? Or something along those lines, that's easy to cope with. When you're talking about the ability for humanity to continue existing, that's a much bigger problem, right? And so Dinosaurus kind of looking at humanity as a whole and saying humanity is in an effect lazy, right? Humanity won't fix the problem until the problem requires that it be fixed, or until being able to move forward requires a fixing of the problem, right? The ability to move forward is impossible without that problem being fixed. Then humanity will do nothing about it, right? It is in the nature of people to want the greatest reward for the least amount of work possible. Where you do have a few exceptions to that rule, that's most people, right? The exceptions to the rule are people like Dinosaurus, right? Or people like Mark or something like that, people who aren't really sleepwalking through life. And so it's one of those things where it's intriguing, because at the end of the day, Dinosaurus, he makes this argument. He's like, I'm not doing this because I'm looking to amass power. I don't want to push humanity to the brink of extinction and wipe out 80% of the world's population, because that's really what is happening here, right? Killing most people who exist along coastal cities, that's wiping out something like 80% of the world's population. He's like, I'm doing this because I care, because it's about saving modern civilization, right? By wiping out 80% of people, it takes society back down to 20%. Now, the funny thing about this is that Dinosaurus is assuming that humanity would even learn from this in the first place, right? One of the other aspects of humanity is this: people don't care what you say as long as you say it nicely. That's how people view the world now, right? So you could walk up to a person and call them everything but a child of God, so long as you do it in a way that sounds nice. And so so at the end of the day, because what you have here is an extremely violent action that comes from a place of trying to achieve a legitimate means, people won't care because the action overshadows the message. And so in the midst of all this, because of the fact that Mark simply won't give it up, right? Because of the fact that Mark's like, no, like I'm not tolerating this. You know, I trusted you. You told me that we were going to work together. You told me you were not going to implement any more plans where you were going to cause catastrophic loss of life. Like you told me that we could work together. And because Dinosaurus vehemently believes that he's right, at the end of the day, he overpowers Mark and is like, there's only one thing to do here, right? Only one thing that can be done. And so in the rubble of this collapsing building, he overpowers Mark, knocks him out, and then kills him in front of everybody, in front of the world. Where the whole thing's being streamed, he rips his body in half and throws it away. And that's it. As far as the world is concerned, Mark is dead, right? At that point, Mark wakes up in total blackness, right? Just wakes up in just a complete and total landscape of pure blackness. He can't hear anything and he can't see anything. He can hear himself, I guess, so that's basically it. But then he hears this kind of disembodied voice that comes out of nowhere. Now, while that's going on, humanity is on the outside trying to find some way to basically set the tide back to where it's supposed to be, right? To basically create this circumstance where the waters recede from the coastal regions. I mean, this would happen over time. Humanity's just trying to get it to happen faster, right? The faster it happens, the more lives they can save is basically what's going on, right? The more humanity can continue to contribute to problems with the environment. And so what you end up having is basically Mark strapped up to a bed and Dinosaurus just kind of watching over him, right? And it's one of these cool things where he says, if you notice, and maybe this is something that Mark had never studied before, but that Viltrumites themselves have the ability to fly. And that what this is done or how this is achieved is through an impossibly complicated and incredibly sensitive process that happens in his ears. In effect, Mark's ears are his weakness. And that's exactly what Dinosaurus targeted. And it was a pretty genius maneuver. What Dinosaurus did here is he had to prove that he was right. He needed the world to see that he was the dominant god, not so that he could conquer the world, but so that the world would view his philosophies as being right. And so what he did is to remove Mark from the equation, both so Mark could just kind of continue to operate seemingly in secret, that what he did is he went through a series of processes trying to clone Mark. Now, part of this seemed to be because he was trying to find a way to duplicate Mark so that Mark could basically have his powers or something along those lines. Those powers could be restored to him. But once Mark showed back up with his powers, the fight broke out, but a clone body had already been created, albeit imperfect, that in the midst of this fight, when it looked like Mark had been knocked out, what Dinosaurus had actually done was open a portal in that crumbling building, throw Mark through it so Mark would land here, and then in turn grab the clone body and then rip it in half. So as far as the world was concerned, Mark was dead, when in reality, it was a trick by Dinosaurus. It's pretty genius. It's a pretty ingenious thing. Now, of course, Angstrom Levy also comes back and then finds out Mark's dead. Doesn't really matter at the moment, right? It's a thing that's happening, but it will become important later on down the line. The thing about this, though, is that Mark and Dinosaurus actually get into this really, really interesting debate where Mark approaches things a little bit different. And he's like, here's the problem that you have, Dinosaurus, right? What if everything you've done, all the work put towards fixing things, what if that's the exact opposite of what needs to happen? The coming climate crisis was forcing humanity to rethink everything, right? It had us considering new ways of life, new ways to find energy to survive on this planet. It was causing us to reform, to change our old ways, to grow and to adapt. You think you've saved us by taking the problem away, by killing us so that we don't harm the ecosystem, so that we don't harm the planet because there are less of us. You've just slowed things down and you haven't fixed anything. And that is really the truth to a degree of what Dinosaurus did. He's still right in his actions, but at the end of the day, Mark makes a very good point here, right? It's like sheltering a person from the dangers of the world versus letting a person experience the dangers of the world. Are they going to get some bumps and bruises? Sure. Are they going to get hurt? Yes. Are they going to be pushed to their mental and emotional limits? Absolutely. Are they going to come out stronger? If they survive it, yes, right? That's the nature of the world. You have to let people struggle. You have to let them go through these terrible situations so they can build this all-encompassing and universally important thing called resilience. And that's what Mark's message is to Dinosaurus. You can't simply just remove the problem from humanity and believe that humanity will somehow enter an age of utopia and everything will be okay. Humanity has to fail. people have to fail. They have to find some way to fix the problem on their own. Otherwise, they will never learn anything, right? It's the Dinosaurus equivalent of Thanos blinking out half the life in the universe in order to fix overpopulation and all that kind of stuff and a lack of resources, right? If humanity doesn't understand or agree with the motivation for why it was done, nothing will be learned. And so the actions of Thanos become a stopgap measure because in 500 years, the entire universe's population is right back up to where it was before, right? And so at the end of the day, Dinosaurus brings Mark out, right? He's like, okay, fine, right? He just basically allows Mark to wake up and says like, I've set you free, Mark, and I can see that now. I can see that you're right? I can see that humanity just has to be allowed to fail, right? These actions of mine, despite the fact that they come from a place of positivity, will not teach humanity anything. Humanity is going to have to undergo its course of developing renewable energies and like electric cars and stuff like that, only to find out that it's too late. And they're going to have to basically be pushed to the brink of extinction and to face complete and catastrophic destruction of the human race. And then if they survive, they'll take those lessons going forward, right? But like, it's like what's happening here in the real world, right? Climate change in the real world. It's way too late. It's been too late. It's been too late for a long time. At this point, humanity's just kind of slowly walking to its own demise, and we've only got so long before, things just get really, really bad. But there's no saving the day, right? It's just too late here. And so because of that, Dinosaurus basically says there's only one thing to be done here, right? Like for me, like I get that it was wrong to flood these cities, but I thought I was doing the right thing. And in truth, I will not stop, right? I believe that I am right. I believe that I'm doing the right thing. But so long as I continue to exist, as I try to fix things, improve things somehow, all that's going to happen is that seemingly things are going to get worse. And so there's only one option here, Mark. You need to do exactly what you should have done in Las Vegas. You have to kill me. And Mark does. Mark kills Dinosaurus. We don't see it happen. It happens off panel, but literally Mark comes out covered in blood, right? So basically he kills Dinosaurus, and that's basically the end of it, right? And so at that point, you end up learning from Cecil that what's happened here is that robots, along with some of the best scientific minds in the world, have essentially created kind of artificial moons that will basically have a synchronous orbit around the world and basically balance the tides out, right? Is essentially what these are going to be doing. And then it'll last however long it needs to last until they can effectively save the day. And then of course you switch over to the home of Mark and Adam Eve. Adam Eve, of course, losing her mind because she believed that what she saw was real. Mark really was ripped in half. Mark was dead. Of course, Mark shows up, says everything's cool, and all that kind of cool stuff. And the day's saved, and everything's copacetic. But then you find out that Adam Eve is pregnant again, right? So that's kind of a cool thing, where Mark's like, I thought we were careful. We were using like condoms, protection and whatnot. And she's like, I don't know, maybe it's the nature of just being a Viltrumite, right? it's just it broke through. I have no idea. But the important thing, and this is probably the most significant thing to come out of this story, is basically General Thragg. And the reason why is because with Freddie Mercury, one of the things to keep in mind is Freddie Mercury has been very pissed off with most, or at least with some of the Viltrumite race. And the reason why is because the Viltrumites are supposed to be here on this world for the purpose of procreation, right? To bring the numbers of the Viltrumite race back up. Sure, there'll be a hybrid between Viltrumites and humans, but as we've seen over the course of the Invincible series, that basically a human Viltrumite hybrid is actually stronger than either one by themselves. And so with everything that's going on and the fact that General Thragg had discovered that some of his people just are only procreating with one person, right? They're following what is in effect the standard human concept of marriage, which is you find a person, you settle down with that person, you form a family, you live the rest of your lives together, and then like you both die, right? Just kind of following that sort of formulaic pattern that in turn it's slowing the process, right? Some of those Viltrumites are refusing to procreate at all. Like they don't want to have any kind of kids at all. And so because of this, he ends up basically blaming Nolan, right? That in reality, it's essentially the fault of Nolan. And so a fight basically breaks out between the two and all hell starts to break loose. Now, the crazy thing about that is that in this conflict and in this battle, Freddie Mercury basically comes clean and says like, it's time that you understand the truth, Nolan, right? Like when Nolan's like, why are you attacking me, right? Like what's going on? He's like, it's time that you know the truth, right? It's time you understand what's really going on. And so what he does is he just kind of reveals the truth of what's happening, right? That in the aftermath of the Scourge virus and the idea of the Viltrumite race basically falling apart, experiencing self-destruction and so on, that General Thragg had rose as the Grand Regent and the strongest of them all and basically taking control. He provided order where order didn't exist anymore. And that in turn, what he had done was restructure the Viltrumite race so that they were the most powerful, right? But all this had been done following the death of Lord Argall, right? Remember, Lord Argall had basically been killed off as the last remaining leader of the Viltrumite race, and his family line, his descendants, were basically believed to have been killed. But when Freddie Mercury learned that Nolan and Mark were the rightful heirs to the throne of Viltrum, he panicked, and he killed seemingly anybody who knew what was going on. And so in turn, he swore that anybody who was a descendant of Argyle would be killed off, and that he would maintain his control over the Viltrumite race, because it was only by his leadership that the Viltrumite race basically continue to exist, right? Nolan doesn't care. He's like, I don't care. Like, I don't want to lead the Viltrumite race. I have no interest in that. I've got my wife, I got my kids, I want my life here, I want to be left the hell alone, and that's it. But from the stance of Freddie Mercury, it's no. So long as you exist, you and your future descendants will be a threat to my reign, because while you don't care and Mark doesn't care, maybe your grandson will, or maybe your great-great-grandson will. Maybe any one of the future heirs that come from you guys will care. So long as I let you live, I will have to worry about my reign being challenged, and it will be done legally, right? They will have every right to claim control of the throne, and there'll be nothing that I can do. And so in the midst of this fight where Freddie Mercury is getting the upper hand on Nolan, suddenly he's stopped, right? Where he's about to kill this guy, he's basically stopped. And he's stopped by the other members of the Viltrumite race who show up here, and they're like, explain yourself, what's going on? And that's when he tries to pass this off, that what Nolan was doing was trying to assassinate him, right? It was an assassination attempt. He's trying to take out, Freddie Mercury so that Nolan can seize control of the Viltrumite race for himself, conquer everything, all that kind of stuff. And one of them basically picks up, you found the heir of Argyle, right? That's who this guy is. This guy Nolan is the rightful heir of the Viltrumite empire. And the response of Freddie Mercury is, and he's weak. Look at him, like, I absolutely pummeled this guy, right? Like, strength is what made our race great. And the response of the Viltrumites is, no, we followed Lord Argyle because of his wisdom, because he led us to do and to accomplish great things. We followed you because you were the strongest of us, and at that time we needed a person of strength, but we don't need a person of strength. We need a person who's wise. That's not you. And they basically go to attack him and actually just start beating him to death, and then ultimately Nolan tells him to stand down, and is like, no. And at that point, they all bend the knee. That as it stands right now, Nolan is being recognized as the rightful ruler of the Viltrumite race. He is the heir to the throne, and he is now the Viltrumite king. And so taking a position and really kind of stepping into it and talking to the Viltrumites and essentially saying, I know this is all kind of weird, right? This is all kind of a strange time. I'm gonna make this quick. Embrace what it means to live on Earth. Embrace the idea of having a family. I know you guys, usually, at least in years past, you guys as Viltrumites, you didn't really settle down with any one particular person, right? It was just indiscriminate procreation with however many people you wanted to, but that's not how things work here, right? The way that you're experiencing this, in the sense that you find a partner and you settle down with that partner and you pop out some kids and you live your life together with that partner, right? How everybody does it. That's how things get done here, right? So embrace that, step into it. That's not something that should be shunned, right? Live your life and enjoy the life that you've created with humanity. And it's kind of celebrated. They're like, yeah, Mark thinks it's weird, right, to be here and to watch all this unfold, but it's basically celebrated. And so following that, you basically transition back to Mark talking with Adam Eve. And the reality is, like, he kind of dumps the information about his dad basically being the one to lead the Viltrumite race now, and Mark is essentially a prince, or whatever you would call a prince, as the son of an emperor, right? So I don't know exactly what that name would be, right? Just emperor in waiting. I don't really know. But at the end of it all, there is a part of Mark that questions the legitimacy of his dad, right? It's one of those interesting things that even after everything that's happened, Mark asked the question, part of me thinks, was it some kind of evil genius, right? Was it all some plan that he had orchestrated, right? That knowing all this would happen, right? Instigating the Viltrumite war and all that kind of stuff, and knowing the Viltrumite race because of the fact that humans and Viltrumites are almost identicals in terms of DNA, that pushing their race to the brink of extinction would lead them here and basically consolidate them down into one place, and then essentially organize everything in such a way to where he'd be able to rise up as basically the legitimate leader of the Viltrumite race itself, and then basically become its ruler. Is that really what he was shooting for? Of course, we know that's not the case, right? That's not really what was going on, or at least it doesn't seem to be. But the important thing is that at the end of the day, Mark's like, it's cool, right? I mean, it's just kind of a question that I had, some kind of a thought that I was wondering. But because of the fact that Adam, Eve, and Mark are expecting another kid, they're like, let's do this the right way, right? Let's do it the way that we're supposed to be doing, right? Like we're having a child, right? We are doing what humanity's been doing since the dawn of modern man, so I guess that's cool. And it's like, let's do this the right way. So because of the fact that Mark's broke, right? That's one thing to keep in mind. Mark doesn't have money, right? I mean, he doesn't really, I mean, I guess he does because he's got like the whole organization thing, but she ends up basically popping the question, right? As one of the very rare turns that you normally never see, that Eve is actually the one that asks Mark to marry her, as opposed to the other way around, right? She literally materializes a ring out of nowhere, and it was like, it's the ring I always wanted, so I figured I might as well just make it myself. And she's like, will you marry me? And in the end, Mark's like, yeah, absolutely I will. Right? So of course we get to avoid that future where Mark and Eve just never really get together and she just ends up being miserable for the rest of her life. But Mark and Eve are getting married. So it's cool. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.